Welcome to the Ricky Mathews Show, where we celebrate the people who have worked so hard and are working so hard to make this state, Mississippi, such a great place to live, work, and play. So it's Thursday on this show, and on Thursday we have an expanded show into the Jackson and in the Delta markets. We've always been on SuperTalk TV at C Spire TV, and of course you can watch us on your favorite podcast or on Facebook or YouTube, however you choose to engage in this show. It's been a kind of a sad week for us in coastal Mississippi, and I say this mostly for the listeners in Jackson and the Delta. We actually did a tribute show to my friend George Logal yesterday on this show, and what an incredible leader he was. But he passed away last Friday. And George was actually on this show, this expanded show, last month, talking about Mississippi and how William Winter influenced him. And just an incredible conversation. If you listen to that show, you know how special it was. Even at the end, I asked him what his secret to longevity was. And he told me about he was looking forward to going skiing in January. And he talked about his wife, Peggy, and it's sad for us in coastal Mississippi, but as the folks who worked with me to do the tribute show to George said, he lived a full life. He gave so much. He leaves such an incredible legacy to coastal Mississippi. I think it's probably one of the most significant leaders in coastal Mississippi history in terms of what he brought to this area. But Mayor Brent Warr, the former mayor of Gulfport, the president of Mississippi Power, Anthony Wilson, Jerry St. Pé, the former CEO of Ingalls, my mentor and the former publisher of the Sun Herald, Roland Weeks, Dave Dennis. Dave incidentally ran for governor at one point, one of the most significant community leaders I've ever come in contact with. What he does in the community is incredible. Lenny Sawyer from Sawyer Realty and just an investor and a terrific community leader, dear friend of George Logal. Mayor Billy Knight from Moss Point, Mayor Billy Hughes from Gulfport, and former governor of Mississippi, Haley Barbour, joined me on that tribute show to talk about our friend George. And then we had an extended tribute from the current chairman and president of Hancock Whitney, John Hairston, my dear friend John Hairston. And man, George was like a father to John. And it was very tough for him to do not only the tribute show, but also George's eulogy. So if you missed the show that I had with George on this expanded day on Thursday, you can go to SuperTalk Gulf Coast Facebook page or the Ricky Mathews Facebook page or SuperTalk YouTube page and watch it, and you'll see an extraordinary man, and we've been celebrating his life all week. Now let me shift gears and move over to someone that a lot of you know. He's a guy who's made his mark in the Mississippi Delta. He worked in Jackson in the museum world. He still, has a tremendous interest in Mississippi, especially Jackson. And he's the executive director of the Walter Anderson Museum in Ocean Springs. My friend, Julian Julian, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. It's great to be with you again.
Well, you heard what I said about George, but, I don't know that we've ever had a leader in Mississippi who has stood the test of time, who gave to his final breath to coastal Mississippi. It's a sad week for this community, but I tell you, man, it's also a celebration of a legacy. What do you have to say about George?
Well, I have far less experience than y'all do, and that's part of, I think, what we're talking about is this idea of lineage and passing down tradition and mentorship. And certainly, whether it's George or any of the number of other people living in past who have helped me and you and so many of us, I think that's the magic of kind of homegrown commitment. So, we know if people stay here, they learn what this place means. We're talking about Mississippi and the coast and Jackson, the Delta. If you're rooted in a place and, you've got wisdom passed down to you, then you can carry that torch to the next chapter. And I think that's what we're seeing. And that's always the other side of the coin.
It's interesting. When I started the show with the tribute show, I recalled from a 2020 conversation that George and I had on this show. We had been on the show for an hour. And I asked him how he wanted to be remembered. And he said, I don't want to be remembered. He literally just immediately said that. And it's true, George. That's what George would say. That's what he said. That's what he believed in his heart of hearts, because what he went on to say was he really wanted the work that they were doing to continue, and he wanted to the building blocks that were put in place to create a place where people could stay here or come back here and enjoy what he called paradise. And if he could have a little part of that, he said, then he would be happy with that, whether his name was attached to it or not. But I think about all the people that I've had the opportunity as publisher of the Sun Herald and the work that I've done in the community, then and since then, and then on the show as well. The opportunity to hear from so many who have so much to share about what they've learned. And you're right, man. It's lineage. It's a community lineage that comes out of that, and this snowballing role of sharing experiences and passions and determination to build a great place, and all of those things swirl in each of us, don't they? And we share it with one another, and we hold each other to a standard, and we create new visions and new expectations, and we drive to greater heights, not just here in coastal Mississippi, but across the state. That's what community leadership really at the end of the day is all about, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying, and one of the things I really appreciate, is that the work is what should be remembered, and certainly people will be remembered. We're all, brilliant neighbors and friends and family who were just thrilled and honored to be a part of their lives. But really, another mentor of mine, Malcolm White, who's on the board of the Walter Anderson Museum, but a long time, director of the Mississippi Arts Commission, of Visit Mississippi. Hal and Mal started the, Hal St. Patty's Parade, which it's now called after the late Hal White. He mentioned to me something after so many years of public service. He'll run into people now in his retirement, and they may not know or even remember he was there, but they'll now be managing some program that he helped start. And so there's that humility of knowing that it's not about who gets the credit ultimately, but it's about having the institutions, the programs, whatever that may be, that stand the test of time. And that's, of course, the case with the Walter Anderson Museum. I've been a part of that chapter, the current chapter, but it's only available to me because of the work that was done 30 and 20 and 15 and 5 years ago. And the same will be true of whoever follows me. And that really is the magic of it. And I think you're right that, real community servants, public servants, community organizers, they know that it's not about them. It's about trying to create a platform for other people to succeed.
Yeah. I had a long career at the Sun Herald, and man, I was so honored to work with so many great people at the newspaper. I just can't say enough about that, especially after Katrina, the Pulitzer Prize winning effort to serve the community and what we all learned as a result of that. But, I left there in 2009, went on to, follow my career where it took me. And when I retired and started this show 4 years after my retirement, my wife Ann said, people are not even going to remember that you were at the Sun Herald. They'll remember if they remember you at all. Maybe just through this show. And we had a conversation about legacy. And at the end of the day, people do have very short memories. They really, that's just the reality. But they will remember. They remember the place, like it's amazing. It's amazing to look at the work that you do today to try to further Walter Anderson's commitment to the community and inspiration this Renaissance man brought. That's what you're about, teaching those lessons. But at the end of the day, man, if we can plant some seeds, as our friend, the mayor of Moss Point, often says, and, just know that most of those trees that we're planting, we're never going to see the shade from, but someone will. That's all that matters, isn't it?
It's true. I mean, we won't know what it's like to be here when we're gone, obviously, but this idea of memory, I mean, look at Walter Anderson, for example. Obviously, I did not know the man. He died in 1965. Many of his closest friends didn't really know him, and certainly discovered much more about him after he died. And they found this treasure trove of watercolors made on the Horn Island wilderness. So even then, he left these writings, though, and he was thinking about his own myth and this idea of folklore and passed down tradition and storytelling. So the stories we tell about Anderson now, they're rooted in his writings, his artwork, but he could not envision the connections we're making to workforce development and public art and STEM and computer-aided design. But these things are there as a blueprint. But he, of course, he's still alive in some weird way. But of course, he's long gone, and that's really how you get remembered. It's the skills you pass on and the things people are able to use and to make sense of their own world. And that's how we try to think about our role.
Well, it makes me think about the Mad Potter of Biloxi, George Orr, how he was appreciated after his death, and Robert Johnson, the great blues guitarist, same story. I mean, this we could just repeat this over and over again, but the legacies they all lead. Hey, when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Julian Rankin. I want our expanded audience to have a better appreciation for what Julian just said about the extension, the community building extension of the Walter Anderson Museum, and then we'll talk about some projects that they're involved in that involve the rest of the state. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Mathews Show. I have my friend, the executive director of the Walter Anderson Museum of Art here in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, of course, down here in coastal Mississippi, Julian Rankin. Hey, Julian, I ran across a quote. Excuse me. I want to share it with you. And it makes me think of a lot of things. But, a lot of times when you're going out to do something in the community, when you're doing something new, you bring in a new vision, you're going to meet resistance. It's sometimes very scary. I guess it depends on how audacious the goal is, will determine how much more scary it is. But sometimes as a community leader, when you're leading an effort that is going to get some pushback, you can look fear in the face. I mean, it's just part of being a leader. And I've been there many, many times. I know you've been there as well. But I came across this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, and she said this: "You can gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face." But it's true, isn't it, man? You gain strength and courage and confidence to say, okay, I know this is good for the community. I'm going to push hard, and I'm going to stomach the resistance I'm going to get because I know this is the right thing, and I know eventually people will see the vision and embrace it. It's interesting. It's interesting that I'm saying that to you because you run a museum. Museums should just be happy times and exhibits and beautiful music and, make it working with a nice board and whatever. But you're so much more than that, aren't you?
Well, I will say every museum is probably a little, more difficult than it looks on the outset. But yes, you're right. I mean, there is this idea of certainly some institutions and museums being one. You're keeping these works for people to look at. You keep them dusted and nicely lit, and that can be the end of it. But the world we live in today is so complicated and complex and fractured that to reach people with a message is a lot of work, as we know. And so you have to, as a community engager, someone who's trying to activate, these stories in the contemporary space, you have to find where those people are. But we're, as you know, expanding our campus, our programs. But one thing you said, about the difficulty, vision is extremely important, obviously. And it's not even that people who have vision are somehow better. It's just a skill set. Some people have vision. Some people have great hearing, metaphorically, however you want. They're listeners. They're empaths. They can plan. There's all these different skills. But for people who have vision, you do have this kind of dichotomy and paradox between belief in that vision and the fear of trying to make it make sense to other people who might not share it. But even Walter Anderson talked about this, again, double-sided idea of the best things have to be done through kind of complicated and potentially arduous means. So he talked about Horn Island, going out, to the wilderness there, and when he's rowing in the Mississippi Sound, he says, it was as if he was in conflict with a demon. So as if the water, the wind and waves, were this other force, not necessarily malicious force, but it says the only way he'd be able to get there was through the uttermost expenditure of strength and endurance. But he didn't do it just one time. He kept going back for that transition, that battle, that fight through the process to get to a place. And so I think all of us, especially if it's a large project, the process too is important because it's never going to be done. But I think that's a great lesson for us all to remember.
So, Julian, so people can appreciate sort of the more global, Mississippi global scale that you bring to the job that you do there. Let's remind them about the book that you wrote.
Sure. I wrote a book in 2018 called Catfish Dream, and it was, the subtitle, Ed Scott's Fight for His Family Farm and Racial Justice in the Mississippi Delta. And of course, that took a story, it's about a catfish farmer, and you can read the book to get all the details. But essentially, this story of African-American farmer, self-determination, grit, capitalist fervor, and just, he was a businessman at heart. He knew he wanted to play the game, the American game, and he was shut out of it, because of the color of his skin. And so he showed a new model for how to circumvent that, for how to go through and overcome some of those challenges. And I think when I think about that book, of course, it's rooted in the Mississippi Delta, but it's applicable to America. It ends with one of the largest civil rights, class action lawsuits against the U.S. Department of Agriculture at the time, the largest civil rights lawsuit at the time. And so that's a national story. And so the same thing is true about Mississippi. If it's something happening on the coast or the Delta, it's also true of the regions, to the east and to the north and in the capital region. And Mississippi is a cipher for America in a lot of ways. And so, the book projects I'm continuing to be involved in, the museum work, it's all rooted in this idea of Mississippi. And to use an Anderson quote, he called the Mississippi River, and by extension the state, a distillation of America. And I think I've used that before. I use it a lot because geographically it's true. We, of course, the Mississippi River flows down all the many, many dozens of states that deposit their good and bad and ugly into that river, comes down to the Gulf. But also culturally it's true. And we have to remember that as storytellers because there's such an opportunity there.
Well, one of the things I say about Julian, and it reminds me that I feel this way every time we have this conversation, is that he's extraordinarily articulate, and the way he describes, the how the landscapes of Mississippi in so many ways define us in the history, and all these amalgamations creating us who we are. And it's only fitting that he would find his way in sort of the museum realm, understanding culturally what defines us, et cetera. Tell him about the time you spent in Jackson.
So that was when I came out of college, I graduated in 2009 from University of North Carolina at the time. But my first real job was at the Mississippi Museum of Art in Jackson. And, I knew nothing then. I was an English major and trying to figure out what this meant for me, just trying to find a foothold. But I knew I wanted to be back in Mississippi. I had grown up here and gone away for school. But there is where I learned a lot of what I know now, and I just met some of the people who started me on my journey. I mentioned Malcolm White, at the time director of the Arts Commission. He was a mentor of mine. Betsy Bradley, who's still the director of the Mississippi Museum of Art, taught me really everything about museums that I know. So that was a critical period. And I was there for 8 years, 2010 to 2018. Saw a lot of growth and development there and around Jackson. One of the people who I met, who I know we'll bring up maybe today and in future conversations, is Chef Nick Wallace, he came to join the museum while I was there, and we dubbed him our culinary curator. Not just a chef, but he was the culinary curator. So he and I did a series of pop-up restaurants informed by the collection, and we talked about difficult issues through food, just like you might do through art. So there's so many people, in Jackson, of course, being the capital city, you see a lot of people come and go and come through that are talented and inspiring. So that gave me a wonderful vantage point of the state. I grew up in Oxford as a child, a little bit in the Delta. So coming down to the coast, I do have a fuller vision of some of what's going on in the state. And I really do think, Mississippi's a small town, ultimately, that we really all should be able to work together across counties and regions. And so the programs we do at the museum now are actually expanding statewide in a lot of cases. And it's a hard thing to do, but I think it's important for Mississippi to have that identity and that shared investment in one another.
I had the opportunity, as you know, to visit with Chef Nick Wallace a couple of months ago on this show, in the expanded show. So our listeners in Delta and Jackson who were paying attention at that time, they heard that conversation. And I was really impressed with Nick. Of course, a lot of people know him from the chop. He was a chop champion on the Food Network, and I made the point to him before we started the show, and then we went on to really expand on it. When you think about Mississippi being sort of the birthplace of American music, you think about rock and roll and the father of country music, the king of blues. You can't help but also understand and appreciate the role that food has played and the influence that Mississippi has had really around the world, the food that we've done. And Nick's ability to convey that and his passion for it and his understanding the extension of the work that he's doing. It's not just about cooking the food, but it's about telling the stories. And he's really become a master at it. I was so pleased when I learned that the two of you had joined forces along the way. I had in all of my relationship with you, I never knew that. But talk a little bit more about the relationship that you and Nick have.
Sure. Well, like I said, Chef Nick Wallace, he's also was on Top Chef the most recent season. If people, I think he finished top 5, and that's such an important show for chefs and TV. So he's done so much work representing the state outside of Mississippi. James Beard Foundation House, the house dinners he's done in New York and so many other appearances. But he and I really came together around storytelling. I've been to his Bolton and Edwards roots, the farm in Edwards where his family lived. I've met his grandparents, his grandmother, and learned and seen where he came from and helped write with him collaborations and stories. And we're working on a book together now with several other collaborators and essayists. And it really is about positioning Mississippi, not just in terms of food, but just as a place that matters. And certainly when you think about food, all these great musicians and actors, they all have to eat. So there's a food. You're not going to have all this great vision if you have bad taste. We got good taste in Mississippi, so we're going to have good food. But to track down some of those roots, and the book we're working on is called Rooted, and it goes to Nick's own roots, but really around the state. We went to the Mississippi Delta to do an excursion to find some inspiration for other dishes, and that's Chinese American Delta proprietors. That's 7th generation fisher folk in Greenville going out and catching buffalo off the river and butchering them back home in their tin shed. It's all these places that Nick wants to go because he knows he has a rooted experience and a truth. But there's so many others. There's the Jewish commingling in the Delta. There's Vietnamese here on the coast. There's all these wonderful traditions, indigenous and contemporary and city and farm. And so he's really helping to pull that together for Mississippi. And there's other chefs obviously doing this too. But that's where we find our real passion, is trying to tell that story to people outside.
I think that is so awesome, and it's led to even some deeper collaborations that we'll talk about when we get on the other side, when we continue our conversation with Julian Rankin, who's the executive director for the Walter Anderson Museum of Art in Ocean Springs. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Mathews Show. I have my friend Julian Rankin from the Walter Anderson Museum in Ocean Springs, and we'll get back to Nick Wallace in a second because it's sort of part of an evolving story for the Walter Anderson Museum. But you guys are always thinking about, not only are you collaborating in the community to help build a stronger sense of place in the community, to do community building, whether it be, facilitating or whatever. I mean, you guys are engaged in big waves in the community. But boy, one thing's really important is the collaboration you do internally, because you're really focused on working with your board and your team and a big list of stakeholders to expand the museum and to take advantage of some opportunities that are in front of you, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think one thing, I won't belabor the kind of campus expansion too much because, you'll see it when it comes. I mean, it is underway, and we do have an additional project that involves Nick Wallace that we'll talk about. But, we're in the process of doubling our campus. We've kind of doubled our staff and budget over the last 5 years. But I think what people should realize is while we have on the campus side, we have public monies and grants that are, set aside for that kind of construction. Our operating budget's also doubled, and that has nothing to do with any of that. It's all about programmatic growth. So, when you look at some of the programs we're doing, statewide that are supported in partnership with National Geographic, or, we're doing things with the National Academy of Sciences and the Pascagoula River Audubon Center and the USM Marine Education Center to use art as a way to talk about Gulf Coast resilience. I mean, these are programs that are, happening, in different sectors and different spheres than we've participated in before, but it's all there with Anderson, of course, and the nature that we focus on. So I just want people to understand, we're doing things. There's so many ideas, and we can't do them all, but we're so excited about being able to connect these different threads into this tapestry that really includes all of the state, any manner of humanities and science and different kind of folks. And so that's really where this all starts at. It starts with Anderson's collection, how those connections manifest, and then the campus is just kind of coming along with that because we need more space to do these things.
What's cool about what you say is that, again, I alluded to sort of, this is not maybe your grandfather's museum, that a museum, you're right. I mean, you kind of fight and tear and find all these different diversified approaches to your revenue stream. It's really a business. I mean, you gotta, you can't just be a museum anymore if you're gonna be truly successful. In other words, really wanting to make the impact, really wanting to push forward the ideals of Walter Anderson and what he wrote about, et cetera, as you talked about a few minutes ago. You got to be willing to go find grants and form partnerships and do art programs in downtown Pascagoula as part of their, the downtown historic district. I mean, you have to do that, and it requires a strategic plan. It requires an operating plan, and it's a lot of hard work, and it's a lot about forming coalitions and partnerships, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, truthfully, I hope people, and there will be more time to talk about this. There's so much that I've learned from being at the museum. On the one hand, it is a business. For one, we do have the benefit of we're tax exempt, right? So we get that on other businesses. But also, we can't just open our doors and do good work and have our admissions support us. We have to go get money and rely on people to give us money. So that's a different kind of business. So we have all these we have a store and we have retail operations, but you also have to do the grants and the fundraising. So it's a very interesting model. But I think more increasingly, I'm trying to look around and see economic development happening and say, there's a cultural piece to that folks need to understand, because people come for culture and authenticity, and you never want to lose that. So when we participate in downtown revitalizations, we want to bring that culture to it, that sense of place. But on the flip side, we also want to bring in private sector methodologies, and the campus expansion. Part of what we're doing is we're going to be putting in a restaurant, coffee shop, and venue where people can just come and enjoy and exist. And it'll be themed around mid-century shearwater pottery and handmade creative economy. And Chef Nick Wallace will have a concept in there. And we have a short-term rental, part of our business. I mean, these are all things that we are just responding to the needs of our facility and our institution in the place that we exist. And we have great tourism and support. So all those things have to happen at once. And it's complicated, but it's really fun. I think it could be meaningful for other industries looking ahead, because we're always being disrupted in this world we live in. And we always have to figure out, how do you take a little bit, borrow here, and create a new model?
What happens as a result of that? You evolve, your learning evolves, your ability to run the museum and your quote unquote business evolves. You get smarter about marketing, you get smarter about branding. Then as you build that capacity, you're able to actually help others. You can help other communities, you can help individuals, just the applications for the growing skill sets within the museum, really whatever limit you decide to put on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fun. I mean, I mentioned as we're building this campus out, we will need furniture, right? And one of the cool moments is we have this Anderson design furniture that he made when he was alive. One's called the Pelican chair. Very cool design. And we're actually working with Jackson County Schools and their career tech campus to reverse engineer and build some of these chairs for our campus. So we're going to have, as a workforce development project, Pelican chairs being reimagined by high school students who are themselves going to be carpenters, and they may go to be welders. We work with a lot of these different programs, but that's going to be part of the campus, part of the experience, and interpreted as such. And that's really what gets me excited. It's all that kind of nesting within one another. But ultimately, and this is the reason I'm in nonprofits, because I'm an ambitious guy, but I want to do good. So if I align our goals with something that's fundamentally mission-based and good for the community, I think we can all win.
Yeah, who can not like that? It makes so much sense. There's so much to learn there. And I don't care if you're in the nonprofit business or in the for-profit business. There are lessons embedded in everything that Julian just said. Julian, I know we've got another shorter segment to do here in just a second, but I just want to make sure that before we get too far into this and we run out of time, that I give you enough time to talk about what's the latest from an exhibit point of view. I went to your website this morning and went to your Facebook page, and man, there's just this constant flurry of stuff that's going on at the museum. So why don't you kind of bring us up to date?
Yeah, well, in addition to all the cool programs, and our Horn Island camping trips going to be going off as y'all are watching this. They'll be on Horn Island, getting ready for another camping trip that we do. But our exhibitions are all changing out. So we've continued to improve and not just a fresh coat of paint, but really change all of what's inside the museum. Our collections, open storage. If people haven't been, we took part of our vault, our ceramic storage, and now you can walk in and see the works that aren't on view. They're still protected, but it's open and accessible. But now we're reinstalling the entire Anderson collection. So this will be called literally the collected works. It's a new structure that will be ever changing, allow more stories to come in, and other contemporary artworks as well. That opens along with another show. There's a big opening reception on October 26th, 100% free, kind of micro festival people want to come enjoy. But in the next couple of weeks, going all the way through the new year and beyond, you'll be able to see new work on the walls. Another one I'll just mention, the contemporary artist that's going to be featured here, and actually on view now, just opened up, is a guy named Ben Depp. He's a photographer from Louisiana, and he takes aerial photographs of the disappearing Mississippi and Louisiana wetlands by powered paraglider. So he gets up here in his paraglider, kind of like Anderson. He could use a drone, but he wants to be in the sky, and he takes these wonderful images, aerial images of our landscapes where we can't go. And so, again, there's that story being told across time. But people really should just come see. The campus is looking wonderful. You'll be able to see what's coming. There's evidence of the things to come. It's a new museum every time you visit, and if you haven't been recently, it's a good time to come.
You know, one of the things for people who may not, go to Ocean Springs regularly, when you drive into Ocean Springs coming down Washington Avenue, all you got to do is just stay on Washington and just go a little bit further, and you'll see it. This wonderful walkable community, really the only sort of downtown city center in coastal Mississippi that didn't take a lot of water. I mean, obviously it got damaged, but the reality is it didn't get flooded. And so the downtown area of Ocean Springs was able to sort of come back pretty quickly. And the way I like to say it, and the way I said it, especially when I was at the Sun Herald, is that Ocean Springs kind of remained sort of a symbol of what could be rebuilt, because so much of coastal Mississippi was destroyed. And so in a lot of ways, from a walkable community point of view, Ocean Springs got a little bit of a leg ahead of most of the communities of coastal Mississippi. Lots of wonderful restaurants and shops and art stores and you name it. And then more recently, what you're seeing is the development of boutique hotels and mixed use, with commercial below, and then either residential or short-term rentals above. The city is exploding right now, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's why it's good to have people who understand that you can't lose the fundamental, piece of that, which is the culture, why people wanted to come here to begin with. And we have really talented developers and city leaders and people who understand that. And we, from the museum side, feel like we have a role to play in that too. So I think we're in a really good spot, but there's so many cool things happening across the coast. I mean, all these other towns and communities you mentioned, they may have a different scenario where they're working through a different piece in the timeline, but they're doing amazing things too. And I think we're in a good spot as a region.
Yeah, I know from my conversations with the mayor of Ocean Springs, Kenny Holloway, and others, that we already knew this about Ocean Springs. Ocean Springs is a very literate community. They're very educated. They're very active in the community. It's hard to make change happen. It's just hard. You're always gonna have pushback and debate and whatever. It's a very active community, but this is what democracy is about. This is what building a great city is about. You got to have all those voices. Hey, when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with my friend Julian Rankin from the Walter Anderson Museum. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Mathews Show. I have my friend Julian Rankin, who is the executive director for the Walter Anderson Museum of Art here in Ocean Springs. Julian, there's so much we could talk about. One of the things that I really enjoyed about being in New Orleans as the president and publisher of the Times-Picayune and NOLA.com was the culture and the culture experience I got. As a publisher, I got to get injected into so many different communities and see, what really made New Orleans tick, and where, you might say in a place like Biloxi, for example, there might be 3 or 4 cabals that kind of run. In New Orleans, it might be 100. I mean, there's just so many different groups, and it's just so dynamic and so diverse. I really enjoyed that. But, you're kind of dedicated to that, too. I noticed that you had, as part of your music and material culture workshop, you actually had the Mardi Gras Indians workshop that I thought was terrific. And I've had some experience with them when I was in New Orleans. Talk about what you did and why that was important.
Sure. Well, we did have a workshop component, which was a part of this larger concert we do. So, for those who are familiar, Luther Dickinson, who's the founder with his brother, North Mississippi All Stars, Grammy-nominated guy, his father, Jim Dickinson, a legendary Memphis producer. But Luther has been doing this series at the museum in the Ocean Springs Community Center, surrounded by the murals. This is his 7th performance. We just wrapped it this last weekend. But the whole premise was, of course, paying homage to what he saw, this synesthetic experience of the murals, the movement that Anderson captured. But Anderson wrote about music, this idea that all movement is to invisible music. A lot of us don't hear it, but it's all the different, the voice of the crowing cock, the sun, the moon, but really all the people too, all the cultural voices. So when Luther performs this show, which really is kind of an exhibition in itself, he's got Big Chief Juan Pardo, the Golden Comanches, Mardi Gras Indians, Sade, and her team from the Rising Star Fife and Drum from Como, Mississippi. Again, Luther himself from North Mississippi. You got all this mixing. We reached this time into Biloxi, White Tiger Lion Dance, this young group who really brought the Vietnamese tradition, Asian traditions into that. And so we got this concert that is, part and parcel to what we're talking about. And how else do you experience a concentrated understanding of where you come from? Because it is hard to move in and out of these communities if you're an outsider. We all have tribal, so it's part of being human. We feel comfortable where we are. But art, culture, performances allow that to be on display for folks, and then they got to see that melding, that fusion, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, you had, the Golden Comanches, Big Sam Williams, Big Sam's Funky Nation, Chris Mallory, Rising Star, Fife and Drum. You mentioned them, Eddie Christmas, the New Orleans Suspect. I mean, a long list of people. Man, this was not any small undertaking, was it?
No, and folks who have been before, this was a high watermark, the production. We're going to be recording this and putting it out on a vinyl album. So just look for this show to continue to grow. We hope to travel it too. And to your point earlier, I think that's really what this is about. It's about movement and travel. And Anderson, he was a bike rider too. He didn't just stay in coastal Mississippi. He rode to Florida and into Texas and bought a bike when he went to Central America. So we want people to keep moving when they come to the museum too. Go to Pascagoula and Bay St. Louis and Waveland and see the things we've done over there and are doing with Studio Waveland, another cool creative community. Got a husband and wife artist team who are transforming a space there. But also go north, like we talk about. You don't have to stop at any place. You just keep driving. You're going to find what you need in the Delta and Jackson and Oxford and Meridian. And so that's really the Philadelphia. Go see what Marty Stewart's up to. These are where we want to start the conversations. We're one spot on the map. We're connected to it all. We're all that way. We just have to look at our neighbors and look a little further afield and say, I want to go over there. I feel like I have some connection to be had there. And I think inevitably when you do that in Mississippi, whether it's through the food you discussed or through the music or just through some happenstance, you pull off on the side of the road and see an amazing sunset over a cotton gin. You're going to see something that you'll remember and be better for.
And you think about the Mississippi River being what defines Mississippi in so many different ways, and being our western border. And think about the time that Walter Anderson spent on the Mississippi River. And, again, you and I have had long conversations about what he's written and where he's gone and what his influences have been around the world, the time he spent on the Mississippi River. But he's truly a Renaissance man. But, he's Mississippi's artist. He's not just Horn Island's guy. He's Mississippi's artist, isn't he?
Totally. When I grew up, and I didn't know as much about Walter as I know now, but when I grew up as a small child, I too had a block print, the opossum block print, in my nursery in Oxford, Mississippi, because my parents were Southern people, and that's what you did. You got a Walter Anderson print for your child's little nursery there. But it's true. He is by far, in my mind, the most famous, visual artist from the state. But really, more than that, he's just an elusive artist. We call him the South's most elusive artist. He's not just Mississippi's either. He's the Gulf South. Every time you try to pin him down, there's another concentric circle. And I think that's true of Mississippi, though, not to belabor the point. But anyone who's from Mississippi who wonders their place in things, Mississippi is the center of the universe. And everyone should say that about their place. But it's true of Mississippi, too. And I think we have a lot of, obviously, objective truth to point to celebrate.
Well, listen, man, it has been a pleasure to spend some time with you, Julian. You have such a wonderful way of communicating that I really enjoy. It's been a career in communication, and you're one of the better communicators that I've had the opportunity to spend time with. And that includes a bunch of Pulitzer Prize winners, I might add. So you're a talented guy, and you're making your mark on Mississippi. And I look forward to visiting with you again soon.
Thank you, Ricky. The pleasure's mine.
It's always a pleasure. Listen, this has been Julian Rankin. He's the executive director from the Walter Anderson Museum of Art, and someone who really, really, really loves the state like I do, like you do. And, we'll have him back soon. I hope you enjoyed this visit like I did. It was really terrific. Have a great day. And for the Delta and Jackson markets, we'll see you next Thursday. For everybody else, we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great